Hey guys, Eric here, product specialist for TOA Electronics and your host to the podcast Sound Supply, releasing every single week. That's on Monday evenings, giving you guys the most up-to-date information on commercial AV. You can find us on YouTube, Anchor, LinkedIn, and even our Facebook page. Excuse me, guys. Check us out. Thank you for attending. Stay tuned. We're about to get started. Good afternoon and welcome to our July webinar safety and expansion series for educational facilities. I'm your host, Eric Huber, and today we're going to collectively answer the question, and this is going to be with my colleagues, how do we ensure that our communication systems are up to date for the new normal, focusing on the K-12 market or the entry-level educational market, and what resources and products do we have to offer, that's us as in TOA, to make this transition easier and people safer. So that's going to be the main point of this entire thing. Again, guys, if you guys don't know me, my name's Eric, product specialist here at TOA Electronics, your host to the weekly podcast Sound Supply, as well as our end of the month webinar series. Now that we're focusing on our advanced insight series, bringing in some interior colleagues of mine. And it's pretty straightforward. We're going to hear from myself, Dan, and Rick, who are joining us today. We're going to have a discussion, and then we'll end it with a live Q&A for you guys based on real-time feedback. So if you guys have any questions, please keep those to the end, and we'll be happy to answer those. We do want to leave you guys with one key takeaway. This is what we like to do with all of our webinars, is to make sure you guys are leaving with some value that you can apply into the real world, not only to help yourselves, but also to help your customers as well. And that being today is making your school's communication systems or the integrator that's helping out those schools, or perhaps the IT manager, more effective, efficient, and then reviewing multiple TOA products to see where those products might be able to improve the functionality and, of course, the dependability and the overall longevity. And one other key thing to mention here is, and I talked about it in the podcast this week, is simplicity. We want the end user to be able to come in, press a button, and make it work. That's all they need to know, right? So we're also going to review, while we're talking about these topics, our 6 key products that Dan and Rick will cover during today's webinar. We're going to talk about how communication has evolved, right? So during these times, many things have changed in terms of where the industry was and then where it's going in that direction. We're going to talk about SIP and IP and all those cool things. And also some other things we'll cover today are increasing security threats. So security obviously being a huge factor here, safety, another thing. And we want to be able to create those safe environments for our students and the staff as well. How do we work around, of course, and Dan deals with this a lot, is budgets. So how do we work around budgetary and time constraints when delivering a cost-effective type solution? It's always a huge key there. And then we'll walk through TOA design services. Again, another thing Dan comes in and discusses. Jim is out on vacation this week, so he won't be joining us. He's a great tool to this team. And that starts with a comprehensive evaluation of the building, the location, the risks involved, and understanding one of the main important goals is understanding the facilities goals and the needs that they actually want to apply when it comes to a new systems design. All right, so let's get started here. Let's introduce our panelists. Mr. Dan Shore, Head of Engineering. Can you say hi, Dan?
Hi.
There's Dan.
Glad to be here.
And then we have the man that's usually not in front of the camera, Mr. Rick Escobar. Rick, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Rick Escobar. How you doing?
And Rick is joining us from the Big Island in Hawaii. Is that right, Rick?
Maybe.
It looks like he is.
My little island.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. And again, thank you guys for joining us. That's the audience. We appreciate you guys, as always, tuning into these. Okay, so let's begin. Over the last few years, the focus on increased system capabilities is prevalent. It's a trend that we're constantly seeing as time goes on. Schools need to be equipped with systems that allow for clear communication, as well as communication during those times of emergencies. And we want to keep that in mind, both natural, man-made, it could be anything. Examples are fires, weather scenarios, extreme lockdown scenarios, the list goes on and on. But the idea of a clear communication solution, and that's what we strive here for at TOA, is the need of the majority, or if not all, of those markets. The need to design and accommodate based on different threats that could be faced during an emergency situation. So this would all depend on the clientele, the needs, maybe the location. Many of those things go on here. So this is backed by, and I'll quote this is backed by a life safety expert, David Boulder. And here's the quote. The threat of an active harmer situation is perhaps more likely than the threat of a fire in today's world. And that's not actually true. However, the consequence from an active harmer incident, and this is a quote again, the way that we build our new schools, construction, fire sprinklers, fire alarms, provides for earlier notification, and that limits the spread of the fire and often extinguishes the fire before emergency personnel arrive. So the idea here is being ahead of whatever's happening. And of course, we can't predict those things, but we'll start with just that clear communication that we can deliver from an audio company here at TOA, and that's going to be the key here. All right, so let's kick this off. We'll begin with Dan. Dan, based on your conversations with integrators out there and what you've seen out there in the real world, how have the trends in communication systems evolved in K-12 school projects over the most recent years?
Well, I think a lot of the changes have been driven by that, the violence that's occurred on school campuses. The fire alarm systems are extremely important. They have one function, and that is to have you evacuate the building. And that's it. When you hear a fire alarm, out you go. That is not always the best solution for active shooter or weather events or 100 other types of situations where you may want to control the crowd, control the people, and get them to safety or away from danger. So using a voice system with pre-recorded or live announcements has become much greater in systems today. And as a matter of fact, I think almost all of the tenders that we see for schools include some form of a voice alarm system.
Beautiful. And Dan, you said it right on the point there. A fire alarm system versus a voice evacuation system. That messaging, that vocal tone, the human voice, as opposed to just an alarm or ring. Correct.
Correct. Again, the fire alarm, there may even be a voice alarm on the fire, but there is only one thing you do in a fire. That's it. You leave the building, even though you see this. The fire alarm goes off, everybody just stands still, waiting for it to go away.
Right.
But the proper response is leave the building. That's why it went off. Now, the other, tornado warning, get to a shelter. A fire alarm is not going to help you with that. Okay, and a separate tone for a tornado. It can be used in a municipal setup outside where you can broadcast and people know what that sound is when the tornado siren wails. But inside your building, you're not going to be able to replicate that. So you need the ability to tell people what's going on.
Gotcha. And Rick, let's bring you in. Based on what Dan said, this evolution of voice evacuation, how does, when you're designing a system, and Rick, I know you're more involved with the product side of things or the actual products that are getting implemented in these projects. But how does the evolution from back then to today impact the choice the customer has to design a project with?
More and more of it now is all network based. And one of the primary things you see is that originally when I started here about 10 years ago, it was the way they would get into a system through a phone over a landline to say like an intercom system. And now currently it's almost non-existent. Those kinds of inquiries just almost don't exist. It's all SIP based. And so for people in the field, it's now they're really having to understand something about the SIP-based technology, but to also understand that generally now it used to be when you're on a LAN system, you'd give you and the tech at the site. Now it's more of a 3-tier thing. There's usually 3 people involved. There's usually, like, let's say, support for the SIP system on the product side. And then you're going to have a tech who's in the field. And then you're probably now also working with the IT folks at the site. And that's their gig. And actually, it's kind of easier that way. They know the IT folks know their gig, and the people in the field know what they need to do. And then we understand the product. And so that's really primarily what's changed the most.
Gotcha. Excellent answer. Okay, cool. All right, moving on to our second question, or our second point. So K-12 schools have occupant loading scenarios that they vary greatly throughout a typical day. Aside from their normal daytime function, these buildings have spaces that are frequently used during normal hours. They could be used for community functions. Gymnasiums are a perfect example of a hybrid type learning space, perhaps larger auditoriums. And now you have, because of those open spaces, they're being used for a variety of different functions. So they're probably being used more often, if I'm not mistaken. This may make it challenging when it comes to designing, maybe today as opposed to yesterday or the past, and the installation or the expansion of the actual system itself. Because I believe Ian mentioned this a couple of webinars in the past, are how spaces are now being utilized for different things, or multi-purpose type spaces. Dan, coming back to you design-wise, how do you take all this into account, when you're designing a system today as opposed to maybe yesterday, based on the change that is happening? Also, let's say a school is updating its system, during the summer, right? This is a perfect time for system updates. how does installation work in this environment with minimal disruption? I'm sure it's a positive.
If it's expansion, it's usually not too bad. Some of the problems that schools run into are remote buildings, where you have a choice of either stringing one wire from a telephone pole between the telephone poles out to the remote building, or doing an enormous amount of trenching. There actually are some reasonable wireless solutions out there using 802.11 protocols. So those can be taken into account. The ability, most schools that have been built in the last 10 years have a reasonable backbone on them.
Right.
So adding on to the backbone is generally not a problem. You add a switch and you have a way to get to the new building space.
But when you say backbone, you mean network, right?
Correct. I mean the network infrastructure for the school and the district. So sometimes what we see is the school district decides that they want to control everything from the district headquarters. That's becoming more prevalent. That's something we can certainly do with our N8000 system. It's extremely versatile and can be configured to take care of a small to medium-sized school district. We have several of those in place now. Since we have this network infrastructure in place, if there is a SIP phone system, that's wonderful. We can register our devices on the network for that. But sometimes there isn't a SIP server, in which case we'll do peer-to-peer to get our systems installed and in. So as we move forward, expansion and adding to systems and taking away from systems sometimes is not as difficult as it was.
Gotcha. Rick, anything you want to piggyback on that based on what Dan said?
Well, probably the single most important point I could say is when you're talking about, especially if you're dealing with anything with a new installation or especially existing systems, number one rule, back that stuff up. Because if you don't, you may find yourself in a world of hurt. And people, for some reason, often now coming to you, after they've had a symptom of stuff not working because they have backups of it. So number one rule, back everything up before you move forward, and then make sure that you've got backups, maybe even 2 places, so that folks can access it in the future. And you want to, generally, I would recommend anytime you build a system like this, you deploy it with a release package that has a README, tells you what things about the system, who the people were, what the passwords were, information about that system that can be handed to some other individual or other company down the road, and they can continue going along their path. And that's really the key issue. Just make sure whatever it takes to back a system up, make sure it's backed up, and absolutely have it documented.
Good point, Rick. Good point. We get a lot of calls where guys get to sites and they have nothing to work off of. Dan, going back to your point on the remote buildings, you bring up a good point. I was thinking about this. And that could be due to the times changing. Maybe people are spreading out more across campuses or whatnot. But we've been getting a lot of requests for the NX series units in terms of sending audio over long distances over network. Can you just talk about that product real quick?
Sure. The NX system shares a lot of DNA with our N8000 system. It's TOA's proprietary packet audio system, and it works over LAN and WAN, which means you can go through routers to different networks and function and can be addressed. It's very important. We have a large they're not an insurance company. They are a brokerage firm with buildings throughout the United States, and they rely on the N8000 for their door release and door identification through the N8000 system in a widely distributed package.
One
of the things that we didn't look at and that can be of some use is that a warning system, or for example, if you're improving a system and you have a camera system outside for security, that's a network or IP camera system. We have a solution that is a PoE solution you can just tack onto the camera. And if you have a call-up system using a sensor, you can also trigger the horn and get a message out that this is a restricted area, or we're calling the police, whatever you need to do, unattended. So that's a great benefit to people too.
Awesome. Dan, going back to you real quick, and you can just answer this as simply as you can. What questions are you asking integrators during the design phase or the initial introduction phase or the discovery phase? What questions are you asking to ensure that they have the right TOA products for the job, for the right application? What are your core questions? That's basically what I'm trying to get.
I think the most important thing to ask, put yourself in the position of the consultant on the project and say, okay, what is it that you actually want this system to do?
Yes.
You build a story. You say, the secretary is over here, and she wants to be able to page somebody from a classroom. That's an important function. That same person wants to be able to do an all call. You want to have bells scheduled in there. All of that needs to be laid down first so that you can figure out how you're going to do it. As far as speaker coverage, that's simple math.
Mm.
Most important thing is to understand what the end result has to be for the client, for them to be happy.
Yep.
And once you settle on that, get it in writing. Remember that there's a documentation process that you're going down. And then when you meet 100% of those, if they add something on, you can certainly say, oh, happy to add it on. But you have to have those expectations handled in the very beginning.
Gotcha. Excellent. All right, guys, final questions for both of you guys. What communication systems features might you incorporate into these facilities? When I say these facilities, we're sticking with the K-12 educational market. Could be a very small campus, could be a very large campus, that you wouldn't see on other projects. So where might you see some TOA pieces of equipment or feature sets being more utilized in an educational type atmosphere? And how would a systems design different in this application versus, let's say, a warehouse or maybe an office building or maybe a retail store or a retail mall? Both of you guys can. Dan, we'll start with you since you're the design guru.
Okay, so in a school environment, you may want to do a wide area notification. And I mean, by wide area, I mean cover the area from the exterior of the school over to the football field.
Got it.
Which that system is usually not turned on unless there's a game, but you want to be able to broadcast to that area. We have what we'd call giant voice systems that are typically found in the military. We have equipment that can take care of very, very long throw audio at reasonable power levels. For example, we have the HA450, which can be expanded to many, many, many drivers. Usually the lowest count on the drivers is 4. We can go half a mile with that, with clear intelligibility, provided the wind is not blowing particularly hard. That's always a problem with outdoor systems. We have typically you don't use those in a warehouse situation because you have a wall at the other end, and what you throw out is going to come back at you. So yes. You want it to just go and through the window and out into space.
Rick, anything you want to follow up with there?
I think primarily the biggest difference between schools and factories and stuff is that you've got communication between classrooms that go back and forth. So the teacher's talking back to maybe the office, and then they're talking to the teachers. That's this point of contact. In a factory, there may only be one communication out. That's really the key thing there. And the other thing is there's factories may have a schedule for breaks and stuff, but generally the schools all got bell schedules. And that really could break it down as probably the two primary differences. Also in factories, lots of speakers trying to cover areas that may be loud. And when you have large areas, you've got a lot of standing waves. You got to deal with those kind of issues. But that's the thing in a nutshell is really the big difference.
Okay, cool, guys. Well, guys, thank you so much again. We appreciate it. Dan and Rick, thank you. All right, guys. So some key points here, some key points that I took from both Dan and Rick are clear communication, obviously being the number one factor. I think Dan really stressed a great example of really building a story. Dan, I like how you said that. Building a story before you lay a project down or put a design on paper, but really understanding your customer. And then Rick also mentioned the direction of a network-based system, and Dan also put this into perspective as well. And the idea of, SIP, and a lot of current or modern structures today are set up on a network. So the integration might not be as difficult as you might think it is. So just keep those points in mind. I'm sure you guys got a lot out of this. We can go on and on. Also, guys, we want to make sure that we're going to be answering your questions going forward. If you have any questions, let us know. Let's dive right into it. Dan, Rick, and I will be able to answer those for you in just a sec. Okay. Thanks again, guys, for joining us on this wonderful Wednesday. You got Dan here, we got Rick here. You guys are good to go. And let's dive into the chat to see if we have any questions. I don't see any at the moment. But I'm going to ask Dan and Rick something here. Dan and Rick, after hearing ourselves speak and discuss the K-12 market and gain an understanding of what's happening in today's world, is there anything that we missed that you guys might want to retouch or touch on based on the conversation that we just had? Open-ended.
Well, when designing for emergency use or evacuation and alert messages, it's always good to keep in mind that you're going to need to have an intelligibility factor in there. And even if it's not required by the local regulations, it's something that you might suggest. If your company does a lot of these installations and does not own a STIPA test rig, you might want to consider that. It can be a revenue stream, but it's also important to document the fact that the messages that you are putting out can be heard clearly.
Dan, you touched on, Rick, did you have anything to add? I'm sorry. Apologize.
No, I mean, as far as speech intelligibility, that is perceived by primarily direct sound. So that's where the challenge is in large warehouses, because sound reflects like light and acts a little bit like water. So if you have hard concrete surfaces and hard ceiling and hard walls and it's very big, well, unless you're right next to that thing, then it's kind of like in an album. If they push this, they want the backing vocals stuck to the back, they put a bunch of reverb on it, some delay, and lo and behold, it's gone. And then also shelves out the low end. So that means that if you've got this issue like that, you're not going to treat it with acoustic material, then you've got to get more speakers closer to the people to understand what's being heard. And the easiest way to see that is if you just had a PA horn and you're standing right next to it, you're going to totally understand what it is. But let's say you have several 1,000 square foot, hangar. Now go walk to the hangar. You're probably not going to understand a thing that's being said because everything's bouncing around.
Excellent point. Thank you, Rick. Dan, you also mentioned or briefly talked about our IP series horn unit and what that can be utilized for unmanned or automatically or automatically triggered by perhaps a sensor or something. Let's talk about how flexible that unit actually is, because it's extremely flexible.
Sure. Excuse me. The IPA1SC615.
That's it.
Thank you. Is a very flexible unit. It's got onboard message storage where you can drop. I believe you can drop MP3s and waves onto that.
Yep.
It's fairly flexible as far as the audio format you can put on there. It can be triggered from IP. It can be triggered by a contact closure. There are 2 contact closures on the unit to allow you to trigger or call. If the horn is set up on a SIP-based system, you can call an extension. If it's just set up on a peer-to-peer network, you can call it. It can. There's no way. It is not a 2-way device. It's one way out. But still plenty of flexibility there. It's OnViv compatible. There are a couple of limitations on that. So if you have a video management system that you are going to be attaching this to, give us a shout, and we'll be glad to help you out with any issues that come up that way.
Cool. And Rick, leading into SIP, another product lineup that is more modern is our NSP80 series. How flexible is a system like that? Maybe incorporating the IP horn with something like this, utilizing the video capabilities of the system. Let's talk about it.
Well, so as far as SIP is a standard. The main issue you'll have is if you're not on peer-to-peer, it's just communicating over a particular SIP server. Those change. They're kind of, there's people who handle Cisco servers, Unified Call Manager, and there are other people who do it via and whatever. It's very specialized because the systems are different. The requirements for those systems aren't the same. So they may have different settings for security and stuff like that. But SIP devices in general are designed to work with each other. So that's the main thing about SIP, that you can put them on different platforms as long as the SIP should work.
Gotcha. And you would consider SIP or anything network-based to be very flexible in that sense, tailored to the customer, especially the video capabilities, I think are pretty neat.
Well, yeah. I mean, as far as SIP, it's kind of taken over all commercial installations in schools for the most part.
Gotcha.
You don't even see LAN connections very much at all. As a matter of fact, trying to get a LAN connection in some areas, you can't even get them. But in commercial installations, it's all SIP based now. Hospitals, schools, government, it's all SIP. Now the servers may be different, but it's the same platform that's kind of taking over now.
Cool, excellent. Dan, anything you want to add to that, or?
No.
Beautiful.
Well, as far as using the IP horn, because it's SIP based, so you can call that horn directly from NSP80.
Yes.
It's designed for that. That's part of that platform.
Excellent. Okay, guys, I don't see any more questions, but again, attendees, if you guys have any questions, we're always here to answer them. Like we stated before, we are back in the office. At least I am. Rick's out in Hawaii. Dan's in Chicago. But yeah, call us. Let us know if you guys have any questions. You have our contact. We'll be happy to chat with you. Anything, and we know there's a lot of change going on out there. And we're here to work with you guys. And we understand that. And it is difficult. But we're here to adapt with you and to learn from you as well. So we understand what's going on out there, excuse me. But we want to make sure that you guys are offering the best solutions possible from us here at TOA. And, we're always here to help. So remember that. Okay, guys, Rick and Dan, thanks again. Appreciate it. Much appreciated. Guys, we are going to repost this webinar up on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. So if anybody missed it, please rewatch it. All of our webinars, by the way, are accessible via a channel on our YouTube page. So you can see everything dating back to when we started these earlier last year. And also every week, like you guys see, I'm releasing a podcast from my new home with a brand new shirt on. I got a bunch of these cool Hawaiian, maybe not Hawaiian-based shirts, but I'll have a new one every week. And we're just chatting about anything relevant, anything about commercial EV or what's going on currently. And that's all based on your guys' feedback. So we appreciate that as well. All right, guys, Rick and Dan, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you guys for attending, and we'll catch you next time from TOA. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.